Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hey, it's Zoe. Have you ever made a really great decision? I'm sure you've made heaps. Have you ever really made a terrible decision? One that you regret and go, oh, why did I do that? Why did I commit to that? Well, you can do decisions a lot better. And it's an essential leadership tool. And it's something that we need to address and get a handle of, especially when we're working with teams. My guest today, and get this name, is beautiful, Edoardo Binda Zane. I think I did okay with that accent. He is an Italian living in Berlin. He is an author of 3 fabulous books, and he is a leadership expert. And in this interview, we dive deeply into what it takes to lead a good team, what it takes to be a good leader, what are some issues with decision-making with groups that we need to be mindful, avoiding different biases, and a whole bunch of other goodness. Okay, let's get into it. Well, Edoardo Binda Zane, welcome to the show all the way from Berlin.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here, and good job on the pronunciation of the name. We just had a brief chat about it, and you know the drill. It's great. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, well, I'm so excited to speak to an Italian who speaks English, who lives in Germany, and is a bit of a world traveler. And, you know, I know how to speak French, so it's not too much of a big stretch to speaking a little bit of Italian.
A bit of my acquired family lives in France, actually quite a lot of it, so I'm connected to that part. But I guess we're not here to speak about languages.
No, I know. We're not. We're here to talk about high-performing teams and at least a couple of your fabulous books. And the one that I'm most excited about is decision-making, but, you know, your latest one, emergency, emotional intelligence, maybe sometimes it feels like an emergency for leaders, is also super important. But you know what? How did you get into this space? Like, we don't just sort of wake up, write books, and then help leaders and teams suddenly perform in an excellent way. We have a starting point. So how did you get into the place where you are now?
Well, I guess my starting point was fairly classical in a way, as in I did the very classical path. I went to university, studied economics and management, went into consulting, spent a few years there. And I was lucky enough to enter at a fairly high level, i.e. working with the European Commission as a client. But one of the things I noticed, and that was probably the trigger, was the fact that despite working with people that were so much more advanced than me career-wise, by just doing some extremely basic stuff and reading on emotional intelligence and communication, I was able to outperform them in key areas. Not that I was enthusiastic about it, but it kind of did shock me. So I'm talking communication, I'm talking negotiation, being on stage, persuasion, empathizing even. So that was probably the turning point for me. And also I got tired of what I used to do before. And little by little, I started getting interested in something else. And at some point, I called it quits and jumped into ice cold water with my leadership development, training, coaching, consulting business.
It is a bit like jumping into ice cold water when you haven't run your own business before. What was the biggest shock for you?
Well, the biggest shock is how little people care, because you're so enthusiastic. This is me being naive about 7 years ago, I guess now, but you're so enthusiastic because you have your own story. You have, I overcame this struggle and I did this and that, and you want to tell that story naively, because really the harsh reality is nobody cares. People only care about what you can do for them. And that is fine. That's how things work. We don't have time to listen to everyone's story, and it's my responsibility to present my story in a way that you're interested in listening because it's relevant for you. That's probably the biggest shock and the biggest learning. In the very beginning, whatever I did backfired quite a lot. And if this sounds naive, it's because it is. I was really naive back then, but still, learning etched into my brain and not coming out of there anytime soon.
It's a bit ironic, right? So somebody who's passionately interested in emotional intelligence and persuasion and influence, and your first big attempt at selling that, you fall over yourself a little bit. And you know what? Like, it's a common story with a lot of executive coaches. We get so excited about the tools of the trade that we want to tell everybody about it and, sell it as the best thing since sliced bread. And people are immersed in their own challenges, and that's really what's front of mind to them, not that you've made a sudden breakthrough yourself. So I completely get that. Is it naive? Maybe, but I think it's just par for the course and another deep, rich understanding. I have a little question about, so rewinding a little bit to where you were in the workplace and you figured out that you could actually excel at some roles more than the people who were your supervisors because of this attention to emotional intelligence and influence. Do you think that you had that as a natural capability, or did you apply yourself to learning it, or a bit of both?
I think I applied it. I mean, it's weird to say because it's not an innate talent. It's a skill and anyone can learn it. What I may have had in the beginning was a bit more of a hunch for it, or some sort of more interest for interpersonal relationship. But most of it, before seeing any outcome, I needed to study, I needed to learn about it and, have a framework to refer to. So I guess I wouldn't call it an advantage of any point. I just had an interest. I had an interest in getting better in this. And it's not a necessity. It's not like everyone needs to. It would be great if everyone did. But I had this wish. I had this need, if you want to say that it is. And I decided to pursue it. But in terms of being gifted, I don't think you can talk about being gifted in terms of emotional intelligence. It's a skill. And like any skill, it can be learned.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful for those listening who don't feel like they get people naturally, and that you can actually study influence.
Sure.
You can actually study emotions and how people show up and what drives them and all that kind of thing. So that's a good news story.
Yeah, no, it's I always, the comparison I make most of the time is playing the piano. I used to play the piano, but it's not like I came out of the womb being able to play the piano, touch keys, play tonalities. No, I had to sit down, try around, fail, learn the basics, learn the structure, and now I can do something. Of course, I stopped practicing now that I have a kid, but if I sit down in front of a piano, I can still recover it a bit. Same thing with emotional intelligence. Just try, find a framework, work with it, and do it.
Yep. I think that's very pragmatic advice. I would like to hear your struggle story, though. You said that, people aren't that interested in struggling and overcoming and all this kind of brilliant piece. I think it probably has something useful to share with others. Like, what is it that you struggled with that you overcame and that offered you some good insights?
In terms of emotional intelligence, or in terms of my, my business path, if you want to call it that?
Probably in a leadership context. So, business development, it could be that piece. It could also be the emotional intelligence development. Those are kind of both subsections of leadership in my mind.
Well, what I would say then is probably, in terms of moving to a leadership position, I think the biggest struggle is the one that a lot of other managers or new managers have to deal with, which is the fact that all of a sudden, all the skills, all the technical skills, whatever your field is that you've built until then, all of a sudden are not useful anymore, or not as useful. Because up to a certain point, I was dealing just, let's say, my job was doing research. Let's frame it as that. I was dealing with research methods, with writing reports, with combining data, and I was actually fairly good at it. This is patting myself on the shoulder, I know, but that's a fact. And throughout my studies and my work, that's what I was good at. At some point, I couldn't pinpoint exactly when, but at some point, without realizing it, I stepped into a leadership position, which meant simply having to lead other people's job. And that was a huge learning, because all of a sudden, I wasn't dealing with tasks anymore. I was dealing with people, and I was not prepared to deal with people. because, well, nothing that I had done in my background had prepared me for that. So sometimes people, what I see now that I'm on the other side and I'm providing leadership development trainings and the lot, what I do see is that a lot of times people don't realize fully or are not fully aware of how much of a change this is and how much they might be lacking in terms of people management skills. Because, well, the competences, the skills that they used until then, sure, they're useful for dealing with tasks and for dealing with, making sure the job is done within a deadline. But when it comes to managing people, they don't react to the same stimuli, and they shouldn't. They react to the relationship they have with you. They react to internal motivation. There is values, there is culture, there is the predisposition of a person to trust someone or not, which is key for high-performing teams as well. So knowing how to trigger all of those points is the necessity. And understanding that and developing those points for me was a huge struggle back then. But I managed.
Good on you. I think it's a huge struggle for many first-time managers. Is the shift from task to people and people dynamics is very confronting. So you go from master of your craft to novice in a new one, and it's very deflating. It can be, at least.
Yeah, definitely. That's a nice way of putting it. Deflating.
It's like, and then this sort of malaise and wishful thinking for when things were so much simpler, and you just have to look after yourself. So the theme for the podcast in this quarter is high-performing teams. And you mentioned developing trust as a key aspect to that. In your experience and research and opinion, what do you think are like the 3 critical elements for high-performing teams?
Well, 3 critical elements is, I didn't come up with this. This is researches. I'm extremely science-based, and I want to make sure that that's out there, because otherwise it's just a nice story I'm building up in my head. Well, there are 3 key elements of trust. Trust in leaders. The fact that people need to believe that their manager possesses 3 qualities, which are ability, integrity, and benevolence. Now, that said, there are areas that are out of a manager's control. So how much people are predisposed to give trust, and the internal culture, if you wish, of the company, whether that is conducive to trust or not. That being said, one manager needs to make sure that he or she or they possess this specific set of qualities. So briefly, ability means, from the team member's perspective, I need to be able to know or to believe the fact that my manager is able to do the job it's required to do. This means I need to believe that the hiring choices are the right ones, the diversity in terms of team competences, skills, culture, age, gender, whatever is the best one for the job. I need to believe that the distribution of resources and tasks across the team is appropriate. In terms of integrity, I, as a team member, need to believe that my manager is fair, doesn't take preferences, and to specific action corresponds a reaction. So, for example, if I see that someone is bringing a project to a close and gets rewarded in a specific ways, I don't know, a bottle of champagne in the meeting room in front of everyone, I need to know for sure that if I do the same, the reward will be exactly the same and not a handshake. Because that, if it isn't, it's a sign of disparity and it's a sign of not being fair. It's a sign of taking sides, and that tells me that my manager does not have integrity. And the third point is benevolence. I know it sounds fluffy and theoretical, but benevolence simply means I need to believe that my manager cares personally about my personal and professional development. In practical terms, I need to see that my manager comes over and asks for my opinion, for my input, even on key decisions, because that's a massive sign of professional respect. I need to know that there is a development plan in place for my professional development and goals. And I need to see that there is a follow-up to that and that the tasks that I receive to do are connected to that development plan. And I want to know that my manager constantly checks on my progress. Now, of course, if you start digging into these three qualities, of course, there is a lot more to how they can get implemented. We need to talk about rituals, we need to talk about one-on-ones, we need to talk about development plans per se, etc., etc., etc. The how-to, of course, can be the subject of not one book, but a set of books. But for now, I think the general reference that managers could and should have is this simple one: ability, integrity, and benevolence. The study I'm referring to is by Burke, Burke, I think, and coming from 2000, it was published in 2005. I hope the reference is correct, but just in case it isn't, just look for ability, integrity, and benevolence, and pretty sure you're going to be able to find it.
Oh, that's right. I'll Google that up and we'll put that in the show notes. Awesome. Yeah, that was great. That's terrific. So that's all the nice juice that flows when we focus on building trust, which leads to high-performing teams. You wrote a whole book on decision-making, which is fascinating. I was looking at the table of contents before we got on the call. I'm like, this is very comprehensive and well-researched. I mean, you said that's your talent and you do it extremely well. When it comes to decision-making with teams, right? So I'm a CEO and I've got a team of people with me. Decision-making is par for the course. And I think there's different approaches to making decisions. There's the executive way, there's democratic way, there's the consensus way. Like there's a whole bunch of different ways to go about making decisions. The first question around decision-making though is like, as a leader who's accountable and responsible for the performance of the team, when we've got the whole team there, when do we have to involve the team members and when do we not have to involve the team members? Are there some guidelines to that?
Yes. There is one model, which I think is called the Vroom-Netanyago decision-making model, which is a specific decision-making model to decide how much a team needs to be involved. So if you want a very specific answer to that one, yes, there is this model that can exactly tell you that. At large, though, I mean, decision-making is something, it should be taken with a pinch of salt, because one of the things that I've realized by implementing first decision-making methods and then writing the book is that in general, it takes time. If you want to decide on a specific thing and want to consider everything, it's also a call on, and this is your judgment call as a manager, of how much time you can and are willing to invest in making a decision. And there is no right answer for that one. You can go to extremely complex decision-making methods like matrix decision-making or whatever else, or you could go with the simplest one, which I also love, Occam's razor. So among different options, the one that requires the least number of assumptions.
And how do you explain Occam's razor?
Yeah, among competing options or possible options.
That's Occam's razor? Least amount of assumptions, and that's the way we go?
Yeah, I would say so. Like least amounts of assumptions, like options A, B, C. Where do you have to make the least assumptions? The lowest amount of assumptions. If that's the case, probably is the right choice. Is it perfect? No, absolutely not. But it's quick. And that's the judgment call you can make.
You're right. You talk about decision biases. Like cognitive biases is a big topic across many different disciplines in the leadership space. When it comes to decision making, though, like what are some of the biases that we need to be mindful of?
You know, if you look at the Wikipedia page of biases, there is, I don't know, I guess there is like 150 different ones. So I'm not a friend of that type of classification, like what is a specific bias? Because the assumption underneath is, well, do you need to learn 150 different biases and then figure out which one is which? One of the methods I found to work around it is understand where it comes from and work with that. It's simply always a matter of perspective. It's a matter of the fact that we cannot objectively perceive all the reality, but we choose specific points that we can unite and make sense of that. So basic explanation, I'll get to bias in a second, but basic explanation. If I walk down the street and I see a dog, I don't have to measure the ears, take photographs, look online to figure out that it's a dog. I have some narrative points in my head that allow me to recognize what that animal is, and I can immediately do it. And our brain is a friend of making these sort of rushed assessments based on things that it already understands. Now, take this idea and transfer it to bias. Bias in decision making, for example. Your context might be extremely complex, but automatically, because your brain wants to make sense of reality quickly, you automatically choose a few points that you can use to build yourself a narrative that makes sense. And that is a problem sometimes, because sometimes reality is so complex when you're dealing with 3 different people with conflicting opinions that you don't automatically take the time to look at what is happening or what could be the perspective of the other person. And if that is the case, well, then that's when you're incurring into bias. So I find it a lot more useful, instead of understanding or learning by heart 150 biases, I find it a lot more useful to look at it from this point of view. Challenge your assumption that this is the objective reality and try to make a reference of what narrative points you are selecting to build that reality to you. And give yourself the benefit of doubt. Am I right, or does the other person have a point because those narrative points make sense to the other person and it's a different set of points? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that your last point about the other person having a different set of narrative points is really important to keep in mind, because we have our own world of experiences, which creates the filters through which we see the world. And we've got different lenses and we've got different information. I think sharing that is pretty important. Great. So great tips on challenge your own thinking and just remind yourself that you're making some assumptions based on some data points, which is really good. So you talk in your book about the worst mistake in decision making. Ooh, everybody likes the worst and the best. So what's the worst mistake you can make in decision making?
Well, I'm very clear on the book, and it's brainstorming. Not because brainstorming is a horrible method. Actually, this is the challenge. I cannot recall a specific brainstorming session that led to anything successful. It was always an utter and complete waste of time. But is that because brainstorming is a bad method? Absolutely not. Brainstorming is a brilliant method, but in years of experience, I have never seen it applied correctly, and I've never seen it explained correctly. The idea of brainstorming, of course, just pretty sure that everyone knows it. More heads are better than one. You need to throw in ideas and then figure out put the ideas together in a pool and then see what you can make of them. So far, so good, right? The problem with that is that, at least in my experience and in my peers' experience, nobody has ever bothered to explain to people that enter a brainstorming session why they need to really shoot in as many ideas as they can. This has to do also with my work on creativity. Studies show that there is a link between the amount of ideas you generate, that you're able to list or voice out, and their creative quality. Meaning that the first 10 or 15 ideas are going to be boring, they're going to be easy pickings, ideas that anyone in the world could have, and as such will have little value. Afterwards, you start creating something new, creating some new ideas, something that's never seen before. Maybe that's weird, maybe that's unusable, that's strange, but at least it's different. And put in context with other ideas, it can make more sense. It can generate some inspiration. Now, the problem is that in brainstorming groups, a lot of the time there are social tensions. So, simply put, I don't want to look stupid and say something silly in front of my colleagues. Therefore, automatically, instinctively, I will protect myself and just say something that is conventional, that can be accepted, that I'm not going to be criticized for, and I'm going to show that I've done my job. But if we do that, all the ideas that everyone is going to shoot in are going to be indeed the conventional ones, the normal ones, the usual ones. And as such, there will be no value whatsoever in brainstorming. So of course, there is a lot more to it, but if you would really want to have some outcome of it and really use this tool as the brilliant tool as it was conceived, well, you need to start from overcoming the social tensions in the team. And that's a whole different discussion. So this is why maybe the way I phrased it in the book was a bit too harsh. It's been a few years, but I would say the worst mistake isn't brainstorming. It's going into brainstorming without being prepared and without having a group that is prepared.
I think that's so true of a lot of group process, whether it's brainstorming or other kinds of discussions and other kinds of meetings that you're having with groups, that the systems you have in place for the group are pretty critical to generating the results that you want. And very few leaders actually spend the time and energy to set the systems up for their teams, whether it's creating the safety net and situation and expectation that this is how we communicate, this is how we collaborate, this is how we share ideas, this is how we confront failure, this is how we process mistakes, this is how we get vulnerable with each other, this is how we share emotions. And that kind of webbing is pretty crucial for developing strong relationships with people, and therefore the base platform for having excellent brainstorming sessions and actually creating new ideas, as opposed to, as you say, sticking into the conventional safety net. So that's really sage advice there. What's your favorite part? Like in working with teams, what's the part that you love the most in terms of working with people?
That's actually first time I'm being asked this question. It's quite interesting. Let's see. I would say that when I do workshops and I work with groups, I think my favorite moment is when I see that something has clicked. That for me is gold. That's the favorite moment. When I see their eyes going upwards and thinking, okay, I never saw it that way, or making a comment about it. That is what I love.
When was the last time that happened for you, where you listened to something, read something, experienced something, and you went, new insight, new point of view, new perspective?
New insight, new point of view, and new perspective must be on a book that I've read lately. I'm thinking, let me check my... I think what I would guess, like one of the high points must have been Thinking Fast and Slow, reading that book and understanding the difference between System 1 and System 2. If anyone listening hasn't read it, I suggest you take a look at that. I would say that was a huge learning moment for me. And I mean, the guy behind it has a Nobel Prize for a reason. So yeah, I would say I'm probably not the only one that has this huge learning moment thanks to that book. But it's for a reason, because it's good.
Yeah, that's Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, which is, it is an iconic book and really powerful. You know, the deliberate cognitive functions versus the automatic subconscious connections that you described earlier, the data points and the reference points that we have that are in our subconscious database that gets filtered all the time automatically. Yeah, really powerful stuff. So when it comes to emotional intelligence, what are your key tips for listeners?
My key tips for listeners, you need to do the job. You need to make it practical. So there is a problem with literature on emotional intelligence in general, which is the fact that it's nothing new. It's been out for 30 years, if not more. But the kind of stuff you find on it most of the time is either extremely academic, so theoretical, and it's fine because it also needs to be academic, but there is also a lot of it being pop culture now, so stuff that you read online that offers easy solutions like 3 ways to show empathy or 4 ways to be more emotional in your feedback processes, which is good, but it's just all little snippets. So if you really want to develop it, start working and don't rely on little things or podcasts that you hear. It needs to be practical. You need to experience it. And if you want to make the same comparison with playing the piano, start by observing people around you. Start by understanding what you are feeding yourself. And this is probably a good point to start. We need to understand that in order to get to the emotional level, to the level of interaction with others that counts as emotionally intelligent, we need to do the work on our own. And the first step is recognizing what you're feeling and why. And I would say the best way to start with this one is take a week of time and what am I feeling exactly? And why am I feeling this? And if this sounds weird because everyone knows that they're feeling happy or sad, I get it. But at the same time, I would say, great, do you know that you're feeling sad? Or are you going more into detail? Are you feeling resentful? Are you feeling pensive? Are you feeling remorseful? Are you feeling pessimist? Are you exhausted? All of those can be different shades of sad, but they all mean different things. So go to that level of detail and try to trace it back to a specific event. Once you make the connection and once you're more literally in touch with your emotions, and if anyone here is going like, that sounds too fluffy and weird, well, that's actually part of the problem. I'm very much not salesy on this one, but you need to do the work. You need to put in the work to understanding what your emotions are, what kind of an impact they have on you, and how you can start recognizing that and take an active role. Because if you don't, especially as a manager or as a leader, they will have an effect on you and how you relate to your team. So you cannot be the person that has had a bad day, has had a fight with her significant other the night before, and now is grumpy in the office and automatically takes it out on people. Subtly even, but you cannot allow that. Part of your job is managing people, dealing with people, and being in touch and knowing how to handle your emotions is part of your job. And here we go back to the idea of why becoming a manager means having a whole new set of skills. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's about like when you were talking about getting in tune with your feelings and being able to label them, differentiate them. I mean, that sort of, it adds range to your piano playing, your emotional piano playing. And when we can get that nuance, it's terrific. I'll never forget the story from Cindy Wigglesworth, who wrote SQ21, The 21 Skills of Spiritual Intelligence. She was a new manager. She was very task-oriented and very regimented, and she got given some feedback that she was not that great at it and that she needed to learn more emotional intelligence. And she's like, what emotions? And so she went out and she created a spreadsheet of all the emotions in alphabetical order. And she did exactly what you suggested. It's like, how am I feeling today? And she went through her alphabetized list of emotions to try and figure out with greater and greater nuance how she was feeling each day. And before that, she had kind of two modes, as you said, happy or sad, and that was it. And as she started to do that, she started to become more aware of the people around her, of her own feelings, and that was the kickstarting journey of developing emotional intelligence. So I think your point about making it the work, like you actually have to do the reflection piece on it and the observation piece, was really sound, because it's very easy not to do that. It's just carry on with task and hopefully things will come together, but they don't unless you do the work.
Yeah, and I can give you some data on this one if you want, because
sure.
Just put it in context. I've written this book on emotional intelligence that tackles all these points, like how to get better understanding at your emotions, how to handle them, etc., etc. Part of it, though, is an assessment. It's actually free. It's on my website. Just look for emotional intelligence test. I probably can give you the link for your listeners. And it's a set of 50 questions that relate to the 4 areas of emotional intelligence, like understanding your own emotions, managing your own emotions, understanding other people's emotions, and managing and influencing other people's emotional state. Now, the test will give you an assessment of where you are, more or less. But here is the interesting thing, where you are in all 4 areas. The interesting thing was an outcome that I've seen after analyzing about 250, 60 responses. I don't see who said what, but I see the numbers. And what is curious is that, first of all, everyone scored themselves a bit higher on average in the 4th area, interacting emotionally with other people, than the other 3, which is already weird because all those 4 areas are connected. So you are more successful in the later ones if you have done the work beforehand. So that's already strange. What is also very revealing is that the distribution of answers is a lot more concentrated around the mean in the 4th case, in the 4th area, interacting emotionally. But it's very vague, if you want to pass me the term, around the other 3 areas, meaning that on average, people are a lot less certain of their ability in understanding their own emotions, managing their own emotions, and in understanding other people's emotions than they are in interacting emotionally with others. And if you want, we can go back to bias here because, well, you cannot possibly expect that you're going to be able to interact emotionally well with other people if you don't have sufficient certainty, control, and understanding of all the areas that come beforehand. It would be like saying, just going back to the piano, that you can improvise blues without knowing the difference between a minor or a major scale. It just doesn't work. You may think that you're good, but unless you do the work beforehand, you're not going to have an understanding of how not good you are. I'm being harsh, but I'm being harsh based on data.
Here's another way to interpret that data using your piano metaphor. So you might feel, oh, I don't feel competent at playing the piano. I'm not so sure about that. And I'm pretty confident that the way that I play my piano is having a negative impact on others. So
pretty much. And if you qualify, the difference is that if you're a toddler, you can get your piano taken away. If you call yourself a pianist, it's a bit more difficult to do.
Yeah, fair enough. I love it. Okay, Edoardo, tell us a little bit about where people can find out more about you. If the EI test link, is that an easy to describe link? If it's not, we can put it in the show notes.
I'll put it in the show notes. You can simply go to my website. It's ebz-coaching.com. And on the top bar to the left, there is a tab called Free Stuff or Free. And it shows you a leadership test about trust and the emotional intelligence test, which is the one I just described. They're all for free. I don't get your email. I don't force you to give me anything. It's just something really for free because I wanted to give something out. And that would answer also to your question, like where can you find me? ebz-coaching.com is my website. My podcast is Snippets of Leadership. And yeah, that would be it. I'm very active on LinkedIn and Instagram. I publish videos regularly. And if you want to connect, just feel free to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've got lovely energy, very savvy, very compelling. So absolutely, I encourage people to check in with you. Do you have a favorite book or podcast apart from your own?
Podcasts, I go every now and then. To be honest, I lost track a bit because, with a small child, I got a toddler, almost 4. It's a bit difficult to find the time. But books, there is one that really struck a chord with me. It was a random find, but it gave me a lot. It's called 59 Seconds by Richard Wiseman, I think. And it's something very scientific, everything referenced of what works in order to develop specific areas. Talking creativity, leadership, negotiation, communication. I'm not going to spoil it, but it's a very easy read. It's really, really something that I think a lot of people could gain something from. So that would be my main suggestion. If there is one book to read, get 59 Seconds. I'm a huge fan of that.
Fantastic. Love a good book recommendation. Thank you so much. So we'll put links to all that in the show notes. The Burke 2005 on ability, integrity, and benevolence. We'll put a link in there. The Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, the EI test link, and 59 Seconds will all be in the show notes. Edoardo, thank you so much for your time, energy, and enthusiasm, and all the body of work that you've done so far. It's been just a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you so much. Pleasure was all mine, and it was great to have this chat with you. Thank you.
Oh, that was really fun. Edoardo has so much energy. He's just so focused, so intense. I love his passion for this topic. I love how much he loves getting into the science of people interactions. So for me, let me see. The key takeaways are ability, integrity, and benevolence, the Burke report that he mentioned, the emphasis that emotional intelligence is a practice and a skill, and that we have to keep doing that. So paying attention to our emotions, being able to distinguish them and finesse them adds to our lexicon and ability as leaders to be responsive and in the moment. And when it comes to decisions, always to check your assumptions. Assume that you have filters, you have biases, and to keep asking questions about what are we thinking by default and is that useful? So yeah, lots to take away from this with Edoardo. Beautiful name. And yeah, lots to really focus on with our teams, because making decisions in teams can be a bit challenging. So lots to take away here. And I'm going to go check out that book, 59 Seconds, that he was raving about. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. Much appreciated. And if you want to work more extensively with your team on getting bigger and better results year after year, consider joining our Amplifiers program. It's my flagship course. It runs for 12 months, and we follow 4 themes: leading change, leading culture, leading performance, and leading strategy. Different subtopics each and every time, so there's never a repeat of content. And there is also the baseline fundamentals in our community hub. So you can do a self-paced self-study course to get up to scratch on the fundamentals, and then take a deeper dive with us in all of the live events that we do online and in person here in Canberra, as well as virtually. All right, and that's for you, and you're thinking, yes, I want to up my leadership game this year. Come on over, zoerouth.com, click on programs. You find us under Amplifiers. If you want to have a chat, see if it's right for you, sing out, and we can cue that up. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.